Okay. Alright, hello my bookish friends, welcome or welcome back. I'm Elizabeth, this is Reading Riley. We are gathered here today to discuss the books that I read in April, of which there are 11. It was a really good month actually overall. I have a couple misses, but other than that, I think 3 5-stars this month, which is kind of insane. I'm having a Lauryn Hill day, like I did a Lauryn Hill Peloton ride this morning. Although I didn't like that specific class, it really got me feeling Lauryn Hill, like getting into the groove, into the jam, into the little bit of R&B, little 90s hip hop. Feeling it. I'm feeling it. Lauryn Hill, oh, she's so amazing. Anyway, let's talk about books, shall we? Let me kind of give you the disbursement of the ratings that I gave. I had 1 2-star book, 1 3-star book, 2 3.5-star books, 3 4-star books, 1 4.5, and 3 5-star books. I can't do math, but most of those are over 3 stars. Starting out with my 2-star books for this month, I did a really fun book swap with Ashley over at Ashley's Little Library. If you're not subscribed to her, go check her out. She's amazing, although I'm sure you already know who she is. We did like a mystery swap, and she sent me The Psychology of Time Travel by Kate Mascarenhas. In theory, this is the perfect book for me. Like, in theory, this book does everything I could ever want in a book. It has time travel, it has a murder, it has psychology, it has a group of women, queer rep, social commentary. Like, this is something that should be a 5-star book for me, and it just didn't work out. And unfortunately, I hate it when that happens because that's when I'm the most disappointed. You know what I mean? I will link that video with Ashley up top and down below if you want to check out my full thoughts on this. But generally speaking, I thought that it was just way confusing the way it was written. We do have multiple points of views, we have multiple timelines, which I would expect with a time travel book, but there are too many characters in here to keep up with, and to keep up with which timeline they're in. She did use a system, like she called them their green selves if they're in their original timeline, and their silver selves if they're in a separate timeline. But if we have multiple timelines and multiple characters, and those characters aren't necessarily in their own timeline and they keep switching back and forth, so you don't know which timeline you're in with this character, if they're older, if they're younger. It was a lot going on. Generally speaking, if you're interested in reading this, it's about these women in STEM, and it does touch on mental health associated with that, which is a cool idea again. One thing I didn't like about this was that the idea of fate in this book is a real thing, and so there's no amount of time travel that could change anyone's fate. I just have a hard time getting invested in a time travel book where the future is imminent, that the future cannot be changed. So I just had a really hard time with that, and that mixed with the just confusion of the entire book, all of the characters and all the timelines and all the people, it just didn't work for me, so I gave this 2 stars. It does have a decent rating on Goodreads. I think it's like a 3.7, so other people liked it. I love everything this was trying to do. I'd love if you have any recommendations that are similar to this that might work better for me, because this concept is A+ material, and thank you again to Ashley for sending me this. All right, let's move on to my 3-star book, and that is 9 Lives by Peter Swanson. I did watch Gabby's Book Troop live show for this, and I don't think anyone liked this book, although I think I liked it more than some people. I didn't think it was that bad. I just thought it was okay. I do think that Peter Swanson takes some liberties in here. Definitely did not need to use the N-word in there. It almost felt like he was like flaunting, like, oh, I can get away with it because it's actually the title of And Then There Were None. So let's talk about And Then There Were None in association with this book by Agatha Christie, because Agatha Christie does the closed circle mystery. She is like the queen of mystery, right? And so Peter Swanson writes this book and decides, I'm going to kind of do a modern adaptation of And Then There Were None. But the entire time he keeps referencing And Then There Were None, and talking about the book and talking about the characters. And every single time he brought it up, I was thinking, but this isn't as good as And Then There Were None. So I feel like he shot himself in the foot by even mentioning once this book's association with And Then There Were None. Now the difference between this is not closed circle. It follows the same idea where you have this group of people and they start dying off one at a time, and you have to figure out the connection, how they got together. And I will say having that premise really made it move quickly for me because I needed to know the connection. Like I had to know what the connection was between these people, why they were being killed. And it did give Peter Swanson an opportunity to talk about other regions in the world that are not New England. I feel like all of his books are set in New England. And I did connect to it in that sense because there was a character in, I think it was Ann Arbor in Michigan, and there was a character in Texas, and those are two places that are near and dear to me. So I was like, if that's cool, I could talk about my hometown, I could talk about where I live now. So I was very interested in that. But overall, I felt like the revenge story was a bit lacking. There was this kind of killer monologue at the end that some people don't really like, and the culpability of the people involved was really ambiguous and a bit of a stretch. So, you know, it is what it is. I didn't hate it, but I did not love it. I thought like it was just middle of the road fine. And honestly, like that's kind of how I feel about a lot of Peter Swanson books. So was I surprised? No. Let's move on. All right, let's talk about my 3.5 star books. And the first one is Dead Silence by S.A. Barnes. This cover is gorgeous. I absolutely love this, and I love the concept of this one as well. This is basically The Shining meets Titanic, if you haven't heard of this. I actually really liked this. There were a few things that I had to kind of suspend my disbelief about, which is fine. We're following Claire. Claire has a lot of issues, and she is kind of the leader in the spacecraft. They're doing this mission in space, and then they get a signal, like a danger signal or an SOS from some ship. She doesn't want to go back to Earth, and this is actually going to be her last outing with this company into space, and so she's trying to kind of prolong that as long as she can. So she's like,
we have a duty to help these people. We have to go find the ship.
And they find the ship, and it's the Aurora, and it's this cruise ship a la Titanic, but in space, that vanished 20 years ago. And so once they get in there, they start to find horrors, etc. But meanwhile, Claire has a lot of trauma from her past that she's dealing with, and because of the events in her past, people who know about it don't necessarily trust her. She doesn't necessarily trust herself, so it's a bit of an unreliable narrator going on here. I loved the vibe of this, the kind of tone of this. It's very eerie. Think pulling a balloon behind you in space, but instead of a balloon attached to the string, it's a body. Like that is the vibe of this book. And so I was here for that. There are some interesting character relationships within here as well. I just had a little bit of an issue with the main character, Claire. I felt like the twist wasn't really a twist. Like I felt like I knew things about her that she didn't know about herself, and I find it just a little bit hard to believe that she didn't catch on to these things about herself that she's been dealing with her entire life. That kind of bothered me. She was very naive, I guess. But overall, great vibes, good atmosphere. If you like horror, but you're not really into the sci-fi aspect, I think this would be a good one for you to try because it's not one of those super science heavy sci-fi books. It's not like an Andy Weir where it's like over the top technical. It's not really technical at all. It's very character driven. It's about these people's experience, and it's very much got that kind of horror tone to it. So if you're interested in that, check this out. I do recommend it. The next 3.5 star book I have to talk about is Bird Box by Josh Malerman. I read this for Spring Fling-A-Ween, and I thought it was really good. I had already seen the movie twice, so I was very familiar with the movie. If you're unaware of what this is about, we're basically in this kind of dystopian future where this mysterious force is driving people insane, and they are killing each other, killing themselves. And what triggers it is if you see it. So in this future, you cannot trust your eyes. You cannot look at anything out of fear that you will lose your mind and start killing people and die. So nobody can trust anybody else. Nobody knows what it is. And I think that's more haunting because of the fact that you don't know what this thing is, because there's that curiosity that's lingering there that you want to know what is this force that is killing people, but if you find out, then you die. So like there's a disconnect there. It's told in a dual timeline, which I really liked. We're following Mallory with her two kids as she is escaping her home in Detroit. Escaping, I don't know if that's the right word, but she is leaving to go find a sanctuary where her kids can live a better life. She has to go out blind. She has to put blindfolds on. They float down the Detroit River trying to find this place. They have to battle the elements. They have to battle the animals. They have to battle people that are out there who have already gone mad. And then also this mysterious force at the same time. So it's very high stakes. And then in the separate timeline, we're following Mallory before, kind of as this plague or this creature or this whatever this is started and how she got to where she is now with these two kids. I was having a really odd experience reading the book after because the book is a little bit different than the movie. Obviously, the book goes into more depth. Certain things like Tom in the movie is black and in the book he's white, and they keep talking about his sandy hair and like all the stuff, and I'm like, well, I can't, like, no, that's wrong. Like, Tom's black. I can't picture him as a white man. It's just weird for me. So like things like that. But overall, the book did go into more detail. You definitely get more insight into Mallory's head and what she's going through raising these kids. And it was really sad. Like, I was sad. I felt like though there is this horror element in there, like I just felt bad for her the whole time. And overall, I thought it was really good. You know, I definitely recommend it. Although there were a few things that Josh Malerman put in there where he was talking about one of these characters that were introduced, and the character was like, oh, I don't know, like even the audiobook, the voice sounded like a little old man, and he's talking about, well, you young folk and da-da-da-da-da. And so I'm thinking, like, off the bat, this character is like this, like 80, 90 years old. Like, what's he doing? How's he survived this long? And then he said something and he's like, after all, I'm over 40. And I'm like, what? How did you just give me all this stuff to set up who this character is and make me think this man was like 100 years old? And then you say, well, I'm over 40, so I can't do anything. And I'm like, and I looked it up, and Josh Malerman was 39 years old in 2014 when this book was published. So I'm like, was he having some kind of crisis? Was he having like an over-the-hill crisis? I think that may have been the case. It didn't bother me too much, but it's just one of those little things that I was like, well, that didn't age well. Eh? Okay, let's move on. All right, let's get into my 4-star books for this month. Yay! All of these I absolutely loved moving forward. And the first one is Wonderland by Jennifer Hillier. I've been meaning to read this book for so long. I read this for part of my amusement park reading vlog. I don't know if they were like thriller, horror, or whatever. I thought they were horror, but they didn't end up being, but that's fine. Wonderland, I was kind of annoyed because it doesn't have an audiobook. Give me audiobooks, people. It's really annoying when I can't get the audiobook. I don't know who I have to talk to about not having audiobooks for these books, but give me an email. I will Karen the shit out of those people. Excuse me. This is a story about this small town and this amusement park. We have, I forget everyone's name because this was like so long ago at this point, but we're following this mother. They kept calling her like a deputy something or other. She's a cop. She's a police officer of some kind. She is kind of escaping her past. Her husband has passed away and some stuff happened in her past that she's trying to kind of get away from. So she moves to this small town. It's on the never eat sour watermelon West Coast, somewhere in, well, I think Washington. In this small town, you have Wonderland. And Wonderland is basically Disney World. It's been there for years and years and years. The people who grew up in this small town all worked there. It's kind of like a rite of passage as you work at this when you're a teenager during the summer. Our main character, she actually worked there when she was a kid too. She grew up in this town. She has, I think, 2 kids. Does she have 2 kids or just 1? There are murders happening at Wonderland. And so we're following the perspectives of her, of some of the other police officers, of some people that work at Wonderland, and we kind of figure out how everything fits together. Who is killing all of these people? What are their motivations? There's also like, there's so much history that comes into play with it. I feel like there's something important I'm not telling you about it. Wonderland kind of owns the police force in this town because all of the economy of this town is based on Wonderland. Like if Wonderland shut down, every single little mom and pop shop around it would shut down. So they've got the cops in the palm of their hands. And then this lady comes in here and she's, you know, she's new, deputy sheriff or whatever the hell she is. And she's like,
wait, why are things operating like this? This isn't right. We are the police force. We need to be looking out for everybody, not just Wonderland.
And so there's a lot of conflict there and a little bit of politics happening. It's twisty. It's written really well. There's short chapters. Her writing, especially in this book, reminds me of John Marr's, where it's very short chapters. At the end of each chapter, there's a little bit of a twist and a little bit of a, oh, I forgot to tell you this, bam. So it's a really fun ride. I would have liked a little bit more on the actual killer to get to know like motivations and whatnot, but it definitely shocked me and it's super twisty and I think you're gonna love this one if you try it out. All right, let's talk about my next 4-star book, and that is Insomnia by Sarah Pinborough. This is the newest by Sarah Pinborough. She is the author that wrote Behind Her Eyes. I read it very quickly. I went through it very fast. I read it on audio and it kept me guessing the whole time. I kept going back and forth trying to figure out what is happening here, what is happening. And it drove me crazy with that, but at the same time, it kept my interest. I kept wanting to move forward. So for me, it felt like the pacing was really good, but I have heard other reviews. I know Ashley at Ashley's Little Library said that she felt like the pacing was really slow throughout. She did read it physically, so, you know, I would maybe, my battery died and I forgot everything I was saying except that we were talking about Insomnia. I think I was saying it might be a good idea to read this on audio if there are pacing issues, because if there are, I did not notice that. Even though there weren't a whole lot of twists happening throughout up until the end, there were things that were making my opinions change, that were making me think, that were making me kind of like lose it because I needed to know. And I will say that the twist for this one I thought was really original and really good. And if you liked Behind Her Eyes, I think you will like this one too. My next 4-star book that I read this month is The Woman in the Library by Sulari and Gentill. This is an ARC. This says that it comes out May 10th. But I don't think that's accurate. I think it changed since then because Goodreads says something else. So I'll pop it up here, whatever it says. This one was surprisingly good. It was a little confusing, but well worth the brain power that I had to put into this. The way this is pitched is we're in the Boston Public Library. There are 4 people sitting together in this room. We hear a woman scream. Security comes in and says,
"Don't move! I'm gonna figure out what that was."
That woman had died, and then we are told that one of those 4 people is the murderer. And these people are making friends in the meantime. So that's kind of how it was pitched to me. That kind of leads you to believe that this is going to be a closed circle mystery, but it's not at all. All of that stuff does happen, but these people make friends and they have that kind of friendship where they are just really comfortable with each other off the bat. But also what we're not being told is that these 4 people and this story in general is all inside of another story. This book is super meta. It's a book within a book. And it's even more confusing because the characters in the story are also authors, or at least 2 of them are. And so they're also writing stories. Do I still have you? Do I still have you? So you have Sulari Gentill, who is the author of this book, right? But the author of the story for which I just described the synopsis is a woman named Hannah. And as she's writing it, we're getting 1 chapter at a time, and she is corresponding with another man named Leo who lives in Boston. Hannah herself is an Aussie. And so because the story is set in Boston, in the Boston Public Library, she's reached out to this guy Leo, or he reached out to her. I don't know how they got in touch. But she's using him as, gosh, I can never remember the word, as a beta reader to figure out if the Americanized things she's saying is correct, if the Boston things she's saying are correct. And so every other chapter is a letter or an email from Leo giving comments about the chapters of her book. I think if you are a fan of books in general, you're going to love this. And I think if you are a fan of mysteries in general, you're going to love this. There is a whole nother plot that's going on between Hannah and Leo throughout the whole thing. And on top of that, while we're trying to figure out what's going on with them 2, we're also inundated with this story of these 4 people in the library, how they make friends, other people start dying, and then one of these 4 people is the murderer. So it's a bit of a mystery. It's really cool. And I love the commentary about books. Like they even talk about COVID in here, but not as part of the story. As Leo is writing to her, he's saying, you have to bring it up. You have to bring up COVID because otherwise people are going to think you're like ducking around it and you're trying to avoid it and this and that. He's like, you have to put it in there. So even though it's not in her story, it's still in the story because it's in the book within the book. I know I'm confusing. I know I'm confusing. It did have me guessing, theorizing the whole time. I went back and forth and back and forth. I don't think I ever actually guessed who the killer was. So with this book, I'm actually reading this as a buddy read with Beth from Beth's All Booked and with Katie from Katie Be Reading. We each are reading a book and then we are going to send them to each other until we've all read all 3 books, and we are annotating it throughout. So this process was really fun because the whole time I'm annotating, I'm writing things that I know Katie and Beth are going to be reading. So I'm excited for them to read it, not just for the book within the book, but also the commentary within the book within the book. And I'm excited to get their books. I had a fun time with it the entire way through. I read it physically, which is very rare for me. So your girl read a book physically. So that is it for my 4-star book. So let's move on to 4.5 stars. And I have one book for that, and that is A Certain Hunger by Chelsea G. Summers. I also read this for Spring Flingoween, and I'm so glad I got to this. I had heard this mentioned by both Kat at Kat Chats and David from Shelf Possessed. Both of them really like feminist type stuff like I do, so I had a feeling I was going to like it, and I really did. This book is underrepresented. Like, can I get more people to read this book, please? Like, it's so good. David at Shelf Possessed also did an interview with the author, Chelsea G. Summers, and I will link that down below as well if you want to check it out, because it's actually really interesting. She didn't write this to be a horror book, but it just kind of turned into that. But anyway, it's about this woman named Dorothy Daniels. Dorothy Daniels. And she is a cannibalist and a serial killer. And so at the beginning of the book, we're catching up with her, and she's telling you her life story from prison. So she's been caught, she's been through all of the stuff, and then we're just kind of going back in time, and we're learning about how she got where she is. You learn about her history, and then you learn about all of the men that she killed and ate. If you're looking for a book that's got those horror elements that's really visceral and shocking and sexy kind of, but also cerebral, I thought it was really cool. She talks a lot about the psychology of things. She talks a lot about how she is a feminist. And the whole time you're like, well, is she a feminist? Because she's just like, she's a fucking murderer. But if this trope had been turned on its head, if it had gone the other way, if it was a man, we would hate her. We would hate her. I consider this one of those like good for her books, because by the end you're like totally on her side and you're like,
yeah, Dorothy.
She's also a food critic. Oh my god, how can I not mention that? She's a food critic. And so the way she talks about her cannibalism, the way she talks about food, the way she describes things, it's all connected with food descriptions and wine and pairings and things of that nature. Like all of the simile and the metaphor have to do with food. Not all of it, but a lot of it. And so it just really creates this atmosphere that's awesome. I will say though, the reason I give it 4 stars instead of 5 is the plot is a little bit meandering. It's not one of those books that's going to be super twisty, but it's about the journey. It's about the character. This character and her voice as a character, I'm so in love with. Like, I am in love with her as a character. Dorothy doesn't give a shit. She does not care what anyone thinks of her. She is smart. She owns her body. She owns her sexuality. I gotta say, the sex scenes in here are kind of gruesome. So I would compare it to like The Troop. She describes sex like Nick Cutter describes worms. If you've read The Troop, if that means anything to you, like, you know what I'm saying. Visceral is the word that keeps coming to mind, just very visceral. It's doing something that I always look for that's kind of indescribable in horror. And like I said, I didn't have that like super twisty ending, but we do have some relationships in there that kind of all tie it together. And so you understand like the point of her story in the end and her kind of lessons that she learned. Like we get that. It's just not like a thriller, like super twisty. But the writing, I mean, if you were a fan of Mona Awad's writing, if you're a fan of Gillian Flynn's writing, I would definitely put it kind of in that camp. That's kind of what it reminds me of, just like really beautifully grotesque. Okay, let's move on to my 5-star books. And I have 3 of those. I'm so excited. Okay, so the first one I'm going to talk about, I finally read Lucinda Berry's Saving Noah. This book was a really fast read, but had so much to say. I love Lucinda Berry's thoughtfulness. I love that you can definitely tell she is a doctor of psychology or psychiatry, and she worked with traumatized children, and you can tell all of that. This book was riveting. Noah confesses to having touched some younger girls in the swim team that he was coaching. He is 15 or 16 at the time. The young girls that he touched inappropriately were, I think, like 6 or 7. He admits it, he confronts this, and he tells his mom, And the rest of the story is basically like her dealing with it, her trying to figure out what to do, how to handle this situation. She loves her son. And from that, before this moment, he was the perfect son. Like, they never had to worry about him. He was always popular, had a bunch of friends. He was smart. He always got his, you know, was on the top of his class. Like, he was that kid, like the golden boy. And so when he came and told this to her, she's just shocked. And then we follow him on his journey as he is trying to get help for this, as he is punished for this. It's heavy. It's really, really heavy. There's a lot of really deep discussion about pedophilic disorder and things of that nature. So if you're not comfortable with that, definitely stay away from this. But if you can handle it, you know, the odd thing about this book is you think that you're going to hate Noah, but the way that this story is told, you actually like empathize with him. I feel like it's doing a really good job of talking about the thing that nobody wants to talk about. Nobody wants to talk about this because the second we hear somebody touch a child, you say, no, damn them to hell. Like, screw this person. She goes so deep into the story that you kind of have to face it head on. You have to see his perspective because it's from his perspective. It blurs those lines between what we would consider good or evil. It blurs those lines between how we think of people with this disorder. There's also a twist at the end that was shocking. Shocking. In true Lucinda Berry fashion. I love Lucinda Berry. I think she's great. Everything I've read from her so far has been amazing. I definitely recommend this one if you want a dark family drama type thriller. Sorry, my lighting is really weird. Like, I'm getting this like harsh. Okay, I don't know if that helped or hurt the lighting, but it is what it is. Really dark outside right now. It's about to storm. 2 books left, both 5 stars. Both I read during the same reading vlog, and that was my amusement park horror reading vlog. Check it out if you haven't already. I will link that down below as well. So the first one is Joyland by Stephen King. This is now my favorite Stephen King book that I have read, and I've never heard anyone talking about it. Like, people don't talk about this book. It's one that is not super long. It's quick to get through. He doesn't just drone on and on and on and on and on. At first I thought it was horror, but it's not at all. It's like a murder mystery that has paranormal elements, but it's also a coming of age. I went into this thinking it was going to be horror, and I came out like just in love with these characters, in love with this story. I cried, I smiled, I laughed. It was just a really solid story, and it shocked me. It really surprised me. So this story is about this kid, and I can't remember his name now. He starts out the book as a 60-year-old man, and he's telling you his story of this summer of his life that changed his life, where he started working at Joyland, this amusement park. At the time, I think he's in college and he's got a girlfriend. She really doesn't feel for him the way that he feels about her. He tells you what she says, but he's not really interpreting it the way that he should. And as the reader, you're like, no, she's gonna screw you up. She's going to just mess you up, dude. And she does. He's heartbroken. He's on his own for the first time in his life. He meets this fortune teller lady, and she starts to tell him things about his future that are strange and odd. She says he's going to meet 2 children that are going to change his life. One is a little girl with like a stuffed animal or something like that, and then one is a little boy with a dog. He also hears about this kind of folklore from this amusement park from the past where there was this woman who was murdered there. Supposedly her boyfriend husband person took her in this like haunted house place, wore 2 layers of clothing, murdered her, took off his outer layer, and then came out looking clean and pristine and got away with it. No one ever solved it, and supposedly her ghost haunts it. Okay, so this is your setup. Then the things the fortune teller told him start to come true. Then he gets deeper and deeper into this mystery of this woman, and the people that he meets are kind of the integral part of solving that mystery and changing his life. I cried at the end. I had like one long tear, just like, oh. I did not expect that much heart from a Stephen King book, and so I was really surprised. And I really enjoyed it. The last book that I want to talk about is Fantasticland by Mike Bockoven. I loved this book, and I've gotten a couple other people to read it so far since I read it, and not everybody's loving it as much as I love it. But the place that I was in when I read this book was like the perfect atmosphere to bring it together, to have this book be perfect for me. This is a kind of inspired by Lord of the Flies. I haven't read Lord of the Flies, but this really made me want to read it. And it's focused on Fantasticland, which is in Florida. It's an amusement park that rivals Disney World. And there was a huge hurricane. A lot of Florida got messed up. While a bunch of people had been able to evacuate this amusement park, there were still 200 or 300 of the employees that worked there that were still stuck in there, but they had so much supplies, everything more than enough that they could need for however long, so they got bumped down on the kind of rescue mission list, and they ended up staying there for 5 weeks unsupervised. Most of the people that work there are teenagers or like early 20s, college kids, things like that. The way it's told is like a documentary style movie or book. It's interview style, so we are looking back after the fact. Once they did get rescued, they walked in there and there are heads on sticks. There's just bloody horror scenes everywhere, and they're like, what the hell happened? How did we go from these people having everything they needed and settling in fine to this horror scene that we walked into? So this documentary crew is coming to interview all the people, and so the story begins. And we learn how it went from pleasant to insane. This is one of the best audiobooks I have ever listened to. It's only 2 narrators. They narrate like, I don't know, like 10 people's voices, and I had no idea that these were just 2 actors that did this whole thing. It was so amazing. I didn't learn that until after the fact, but there's just little things, and I'm not sure if it's the actors or if it's the way it's produced, but there are little things they do like sniffling or coughing or sneezing that just really convey that emotion, and I was just so hooked on that. I loved it so much. There's a brutal survival of the fittest, who is strong and who is weak, and that mentality switch. The mentality switch where you have to be like, okay, I can't be kind because I have to look out for me when you're in a situation like that. I just found it very interesting. It happens really quickly, so be prepared to suspend your disbelief a little bit going into it. You sit there like, wait, how did this happen? But you have to keep in mind that they don't know when they're going to be getting out. There's no connection to the outside world. They have no cell phones. They're completely isolated. So just be prepared to suspend your disbelief a little bit, and I think you'll really like it. It was a shit show and a fun ride, for sure. And that's it. Those are the 11 books that I read in April. Thank you guys for hanging out with me today. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like. Give me a subscribe if you haven't already. All these books will be listed down below if you want to go check them out, as well as some other affiliate links if you want some like discount codes for Scrid, for Book of the Month, for things like that. Let me know if you've read any of these, if you enjoyed them, did you love them, did you hate them? If you hated them, that's fine too. If you loved them, I love it. I want you to love every book. Like, the goal is to love every book. Obviously that can't happen, but even if I hated something, I still want you to love it regardless. And that's gonna be it for me today, y'all. I will see you soon with another video, and don't forget that life is short, so read rightly. Cheers and goodbye.